All right, I'm Lieutenant Matt Clark with the Denver Police Department's Major Crimes Division. I'm here today to provide an overview of the incident related to the police officer-involved shooting that occurred yesterday, Monday, October 21st, 2019, just after 2 o'clock, about 2:03 in the afternoon. It occurred at 8th Avenue underneath the I-25 overpass. My intention today is to provide a preliminary briefing based upon the information that we've gathered after interviewing witnesses, preliminarily analyzing evidence, and speaking with the officers that were involved. At this time, there are still officers that need to be interviewed, and as a result, I may be limited in some of the information I can provide and some of the questions I may be able to answer. But with that being said, I'll give you an overview of this incident. It started yesterday around 1:53 in the afternoon. A 911 call was received by the Denver Communications Center reporting an attempted robbery that had occurred at the Car Wash Express at 603 Santa Fe Drive. That's on the northwest corner of Santa Fe and 6th Avenue. The call was, the information related by the caller was that he was a patron at the car wash. He was using the self-serve vacuums, which are on the south side of the building. As he's vacuuming his vehicle, a male unknown to him gets in the driver's seat of his vehicle and attempts to steal his vehicle at knife point. Our victim is uninjured in that. He's able to flee. Unfortunately, he had the key fob to his vehicle in the car, so the subject is not able to steal that car. Our victim from that incident goes and calls 911 and provides a detailed description, and an employee of the car wash begins following the suspect away from the scene. They ultimately go westbound towards Calumet, 1 block west. Denver officers are relatively close and arrive within minutes of that. They're uniformed officers in marked police vehicles. They're directed to the 600 block of Calumet. In that mid-block area, they come upon the subject who was described, and it matches both the physical and clothing description that was provided by our victim from the attempted carjacking. One of the officers approaches from Calumet, begins giving him verbal commands, and that subject is non-responsive to those commands. In fact, he turns and begins walking away from that officer. Another officer comes, basically our subject at that point is walking westbound through a parking lot west of Calumet. Another officer comes and blocks his path on the other side of the parking lot there on the west side. The subject continues to be non-compliant. The officer that parks to the west is maintaining a safe distance while also trying to get control of the subject verbally at that point. As the suspect continues to the west, the officer on the east deploys a taser. So one taser is deployed, but it doesn't appear to have been effective, and we're not certain why that wasn't effective at this point. At 1:58, so this is 5 minutes after the initial call, the subject gets into the driver's seat of the vehicle that was on the west side of the parking lot. The vehicle at the time was running, and the keys were in the ignition, and the officer did have the overhead emergency lights running at that point too. The subject drives the police vehicle eastbound through the parking lot and turns south onto southbound Calumet. The subject's in the police car for just over 6 minutes. And the route that the subject takes with the police car is southbound on Calumet. They go westbound onto 6th Avenue. The subject encounters heavy traffic around Federal Boulevard. He's in the far right lane, or the lanes to exit onto Federal Boulevard. And traffic is very heavy that we can see from the videos. He is making a slow crawl up the ramp there with the vehicle. He's not impacting other cars or colliding with anybody. When he finally makes it to the top of that ramp, he turns northbound onto Federal Boulevard. Officers are not immediately behind him at that point. They're still trying to, again, themselves work their way through traffic. As he's northbound on Federal in the area of 7th Avenue, in the 700 block, officers begin a pursuit at that point. Directly behind the vehicle with lights and sirens attempting to get the subject driving the police vehicle to stop. He is non-responsive to that, continues northbound until he turns east onto 8th Avenue. When sufficient police personnel were in the area there, going eastbound on 8th Avenue, multiple attempts were made to forcibly stop the police vehicle, the stolen police vehicle. And that was done using a pursuit intervention technique where the front of a vehicle is used to intentionally impact the rear of a vehicle as they move the vehicle sideways to force the vehicle to spin out. Several attempts were not successful, but the vehicle was ultimately successfully pitted on 8th Avenue between Zuni and the I-25 overpass. At several locations along this route, specifically from 6th Avenue and then going down eastbound on 8th Avenue, officers reported seeing the subject holding and at times pointing an assault rifle at them from the driver's side of the vehicle. The officers, while driving behind the vehicle, were mindful for their safety given the presence of the visible rifle and were actively working to safely stop that vehicle. At 8th and I-25, when the vehicle came to a stop, the subject no longer continued his attempts to flee. The officers confronted him at gunpoint, gave him verbal commands, which he was not responsive to. The officers observed the subject manipulating or holding the assault rifle and then pointing it to officers, beginning to point it to officers to his east and to the south of where the vehicle came to rest. At that point, we had 3 Denver police officers discharge their weapon, ultimately striking the subject. And the report of shots fired was at 2:03. The officers approached the vehicle. They removed the rifle from the subject in the driver's seat, and it was put on the ground. They also removed the subject from the vehicle to attempt to render aid and to secure him at that location. The subject was assessed by paramedics but was pronounced deceased at the scene and was not transported to a hospital. The rifle that the subject possessed was determined to be a rifle that was assigned to the officer whose vehicle was taken. We have no reports of injuries or damage resulting from the stolen police vehicle or the subsequent chase of that vehicle. Damage other than to the police cars. I'm talking civilian vehicles or other unintended damage. And there's no evidence that we have found at this point that the subject was able to fire the officer's assault rifle. In terms of the officers, again, we have 3 officers that were involved in this incident. One is a District 1 patrol officer, a uniformed officer who was hired by the police department in 2013. That officer's been involved in 1 prior officer-involved shooting incident. We have 2 District 4 uniformed patrol officers. One was hired in 2014 and the other in 2016. Neither have been involved in a prior officer-involved shooting incident. The autopsy on the subject was completed today. The identification was made. We're in the process right now of notifying next of kin. And as soon as that's done, the department or the medical examiner's office will release the identity of the individual. The investigation of this incident is a combined effort with the Denver District Attorney's Office, the Aurora Police Department, and is overseen by the Office of the Independent Monitor. So that process is ongoing. I would encourage anybody that has any information, anybody who witnessed this, any component of this, from the robbery, the pursuit, or the ending of the shooting, to contact the Denver Police Department or Crime Stoppers. I can address any questions you may have.
Did the officer properly handle that rifle?
We're still looking into that at this point.
Where should the rifle usually be?
So our policy requires the rifle to be secured in the trunk of a vehicle or stowed in a rack if the vehicle is equipped with a rack.
When it's in any situation?
Unless it's deployed.
Was it loaded?
Is it loaded?
Was it loaded?
Was the gun loaded?
Or was it rifle?
The rifle is not loaded.
It wasn't.
Now, the gun's in the cabin of the vehicle. What are the security measurements that you guys take so that this doesn't happen?
So there is a rack in the vehicle. It's a secure rack that the officers can load a long gun, an auxiliary weapon, whether it's a rifle or a shotgun into to secure it in there. We also have some vehicles are equipped with safes or cases in the back, a trunk of vehicles. So we're still working to determine if the officer utilized those mechanisms in this instance.
So is there a rag? Is there a lock on the rack?
There is.
There is?
Yes.
What's the status of the 3 officers? Are they on leave, paid leave?
So they're on a modified duty. They're still they're not working in a patrol capacity right now, but they're in a modified capacity.
And you said one of the officers was previously involved in an officer involvement. When was that?
Yes, sir. It was earlier this year.
What's the protocol for exiting a patrol car, leaving it running and unlocked?
So ideally, if we have time, I ideally want the patrol car secured. This happened very quickly, and as the body-worn camera documented, the officer recognized the subject, jumped out of the vehicle to attempt to confront the subject, and the subsequent taking of the vehicle occurred rather quickly after that.
They just like ran around the car and jumped in? Or?
It didn't run around the car. You just wind up, basically, once that car pulled into place, the subject was already going west, and the officer was trying to maintain their safety and maintain distance, and it appears to have opened up an opportunity for him to get to the vehicle.
Was there in any moment where, or when did you guys find out that the possibility of the gun not being secure was a possibility throughout the chase or when this whole incident happened?
We became aware that the gun was not secured when an officer saw it and reported it over the radio during it was in the area of 6th and Federal.
So they recognized that the gun the guy was holding was theirs?
Well, they recognized that he had a rifle, and that we knew that there was a rifle in that car. So we knew that at that point we knew we didn't have a rifle on him as he got into the car. So the assumption at that point was that it was the police rifle.
So how was he like manipulating it while he was driving? Was he?
So I'm not clear on that specifically, but I'm told that it's clear that the muzzle's being moved, and at one point it's clear that the muzzle's being put out of the vehicle and pointed backwards towards the officers in pursuit.
And what firearms did the officers use to
Handguns.
their handguns?
Is there a mechanism on any patrol cars where if like the brake is pressed that the engine turns off? I've heard that that's in some patrol cars.
Sure. So we do have switches that we can turn on. It allows the officer to remove the key from the ignition. The vehicle can stay running. Typically that's so that the lights don't burn out the battery and run it down if we need to on long situations. If somebody were to apply pressure to the brake, it would kill the ignition at that point. Again, this happened very quickly. It appears the officer put the car into park, jumped out and engaged the subject without having time to engage that switch and remove the keys.
Can you be more specific on the previous officer involved shooting the officer was involved in? Was it also fatal?
It was, but I won't get into any of the specifics at this point. I'm going to focus just on this incident right now.
Would any of the officers have known that the rifle was not loaded? Like, is it standard to have an unloaded rifle?
It is. It's carried in an unloaded fashion, and then once it needs to be deployed, the officers charge the weapon and make it ready for use.
So if they knew it wasn't loaded, why shoot?
They have no way of knowing it's not loaded. All the equipment necessary to load that weapon is at the subject's disposal. The ammunition is right there. The magazine. If he has any knowledge of the weapon, it can be easily charged and made ready. There's nothing specific that the officer has that would have prevented that anybody else accessing the weapon from getting it.
Now, what's the bottom line if the investigation concludes that there was negligence on behalf of the officer who was responsible for that weapon?
Sure.
What would the bottom line be for as a result?
So once the district attorney renders a decision on the legality of the use of deadly physical force, it'll go over to our internal affairs division, and then they will look at the administrative stuff. If the weapon was not secured properly, that would be an administrative violation of the policy I just spoke of, and then they would, based on our discipline matrix, have a finding and use appropriate discipline as necessary.
This could have gone south real quick if you would have loaded it,
Sure.
everything, right?
Absolutely.